Good morning, Year 6, and welcome to a brand new week of home learning. I very much hope that we will all be back at school 8th of March next Monday, as the government has planned, with 100% attendance. But until then, we have one final week of home learning. We have been thrilled with all of your efforts so far and so proud of the enthusiasm, determination, and perseverance you have shown during this tricky time. I know that you will make all of your teachers proud during this final genre. Now, this genre is one we're going to be continuing when we come back to school, so it's essential that you put maximum effort in from day dot. Let's have a look at what's coming up today. Hopefully that has loaded for you now. This week we will be focusing on complaint letters. My turn, complaint letters. Oh, you don't want to see me, you want to see all about the complaint letters. Complaint letters are a genre you may be familiar with before during your previous years at Arc Franklin, so I'm really looking forward to seeing the wonderful writing that I'm confident you'll produce in this unit. Now, let's remind ourselves, what are complaint letters? Complaint letters are a type of letter written to express displeasure. My turn, displeasure. That means unhappiness towards a person, a service, a product, or a situation. So sometimes when we order a product and it is received defective, that means it's not working, then we would write a letter to the person or company complaining about the product. That is one of the situations in which we might write a complaint letter, but there are lots. Let's have a look at a few others. As I mentioned, you might write a complaint letter to a business if you've received a defective product. You may also write a complaint letter to the owner of a restaurant if you've had an unsatisfactory experience in their restaurant. For example, you might have received food poisoning, or your food may have been cold, or the service may have been delayed, or staff might have treated you in a rude way, unfortunately. These issues do happen, and business owners do receive complaint letters about them regularly. You may also write complaint letters for travel issues or problems that you experience during travel. Perhaps if there are huge or significant delays and you haven't been communicated, the reason why hasn't been communicated to you. That's happened to me before. I've been waiting in an airport for more than 8 hours without any communication, or without any explanation rather, for the delay. And that led to me writing a complaint letter because it had a knock-on effect on my other plans. You might write a complaint letter if you've received poor service in a shop, or if your accommodation issues haven't been solved by your landlord, for example. You might ask the landlord for a solution that you would be happier with. Perhaps you want your rent to be reduced because your heating hasn't been working for a period of months. Can you think of any more examples where you might write a complaint letter? Great, I'm sure you have lots of examples of scenarios, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about them in our afternoon briefings. Now, complaint letters have a very specific audience and tone. The audience for our complaint letter is the person the complaint is directed to. So it could be an adult of any profession. It might be an owner of a hair salon if you're dissatisfied with the outcome of your hair. It might be, as I've said, the owner of a business or of a restaurant, or indeed any other adult. They're usually written in a formal style. And later on in the lesson, we're going to recap how we write in formal language. It's really important to write formally when we're writing complaint letters because the situation is serious, and if we don't, our complaint won't be taken seriously. If we write with slang terms, then we risk that our complaint losing credibility. They will just throw it in the bin and they'll fail to acknowledge it because they won't think you're a serious person. So it's really important to write it in a formal style. Now, how are complaint letters structured? Well, I'm going to read this example out to you. Perhaps I can make it a bit bigger so you can see it even clearer. And you'll see on the left-hand side, I have written the structure of the letter. So all complaint letters will begin with a formal greeting. In this case, the writer has written, "Dear Sir, Madam." We don't know the name of the person we're writing to, so therefore it's more appropriate to write "Dear Sir, Madam," or "To whom it may concern." Then we'll include the reason for writing. So this person here has said, "I am writing to express my dismay," so disappointment, "at the service at your Eden Hill branch on Saturday the 14th of January. So he's writing to the owner of a pharmacy. He was wanting to go and collect medication for an elderly adult. The next point is to provide some background information. So what you were doing or why you were using their service or their product. So if you were writing to a restaurant owner perhaps and you were saying that you were disappointed with their food, you might say, "I regularly attend your restaurant and on this occasion I was out for dinner celebrating my friend's birthday." So you provide them with a little bit of context is the word I'm looking for. Now let's see what this writer has written. "I often collect prescriptions from the pharmacy on behalf of my grandmother, Mrs. Elaine Bingham." So he set the context, the reason why he normally goes to the pharmacy. On this occasion, there were 2 prescriptions, so 2 tablets he had to collect. One for 10 times 50 mg Kendomal and one for 50 times 100 mg Leoprone. You can tell I'm not a pharmacist with those dodgy pronunciations. So he's wanting to collect 2 tablets. So he's outlining the context, what he wanted to do. "I was served quickly, even though there appeared to only be one pharmacist on duty." However, you can tell that he's about to detail the problem because he's used a contrasting conjunction to begin the sentence. "However, as I was leaving, I saw that I had been given 500 mg tablets of this drug here, Kendamol." Now remember, he was only supposed to have 50 mg. This is 10 times stronger than the prescription called for. So he's been given far too much medicine for his elderly relative. And if he hadn't noticed, then there probably would have been dangerous consequences. So he's detailed the problem. He's been given far too much and he's been really specific, 10 times too much. He hasn't just said a little bit too much. He's precisely stated how much so that it's clear what a big error this was or how much of an error this was. Now, really important when you detail the problem is to also detail the consequences. How have you suffered or how could you have suffered because of this problem? Doing this will mean the reader or audience is more likely to provide you with the outcome that you want. So he said, "If I hadn't noticed the difference between the prescription and the actual tablets," the prescription was the amount he was supposed to get, "my grandmother could have taken a dangerous overdose." And he said, "I would be worried about getting any future prescriptions at this pharmacy." So he's detailed the consequences. She could have taken a dangerous overdose. And the word dangerous is really effective here because it shows the reader just how serious this situation was. "The pharmacist apologised and corrected the mistake, but I wanted to bring it to your attention." Now, the final bit of a complaint letter always involves the writer saying what they would like the outcome to be. So he said he thinks it happened because there were not enough staff on duty. And he's tried to be empathetic, keeping really polite and formal. "I understand that mistakes happen, but there needs to be a minimum of 2 pharmacists at all times, so all prescriptions can be checked." So that's what he wants. He hasn't asked for the pharmacist to be closed or to receive any compensation. It wasn't a huge mistake and he noticed straight away. So therefore there wasn't a massive problem. And his outcome, he wants an outcome that he thinks will help him avoid this situation in the future, but also will help other people avoid it too. And then he said, I hope you can take steps to make sure this mistake does not happen again. Or he could have said, I hope you can take steps to make sure that there are always a minimum of 2 pharmacists at all times, to make sure this doesn't happen again, to really emphasize what he wants to happen. And finally, if you don't know the name of the person, you should always sign off saying yours faithfully, which is a really formal way to sign off. So that is the structure that we will follow when we eventually write a complaint letter. Now, depending on the situation, you might have several problems, or you might have more background information. But when we read the situation, we can tweak our letters accordingly. Okay, now, as I've already alluded to, writing in a formal style is really important when we're writing a complaint letter, as is using precise and powerful vocabulary choices, so detailing exactly what happened and exactly the effect that it had on you. And finally, it's really important to include clear facts, not just, you can see here in this example, the gentleman Roger who's written this hasn't just said, I received too many of the tablets or too much of the tablets. He's been really clear about him receiving doses that were 10 times stronger. So he's been really precise. Again, dismay is a really example of a powerful word. So you're not just saying, I'm not happy. You're using really precise vocabulary that conveys just how disappointed you are by the situation. So these 3 features, formal style, precise and powerful vocabulary choices, and clear facts, is what we should keep in the back of our mind when we're writing. Now, let's have a look at the difference between formal and informal language. I'm sure you can remember lots of this, but because formal language is such a huge feature of complaint letters, we will just recap. So formal language is used in situations that are serious or that involve people we don't know well. Informal language is more common than when we speak. Contractions, ellipses, and slang terms like hey mate are not common in formal language, nor are abbreviations such as LOL, BRB, ASAP, or anything like that. That would be more appropriate if you're talking to your friend on a device or in person. Formal language uses standard grammar, complex sentences, correct spelling, longer words and phrases, fewer contracted words, no slang, and fewer abbreviations. You might use the odd abbreviation, for example, if you were writing to the BBC. You would shorten it in that way, but not anything that you would normally use in text. Now, I'm going to draw your attention to the very top line because this is really important. Formal or polite style or tone. Even if you feel really distressed or really sad or really disappointed by what's happened, perhaps you were looking forward to the food at a restaurant all day, or you were looking forward to receiving that present that you'd wanted for months. It's essential that we keep our style polite. If we come across as rude, then our complaint will be dismissed immediately. So we must keep a really polite tone at all times. Within that, we can use really powerful language, but we're going to see some examples in a moment of language that would be considered impolite or rude. Now, formal or informal. Let's revise a few easy examples before moving on to looking at a letter. She has decided to accept the job, or she's decided to accept the job. Which one is formal? Have a think. Well done. She has decided to accept the job is an example of formal writing. They're both pretty much the same, except this one has a contraction, and we don't see contractions as much in formal writing. What about in this example? Which one is more formal? We went to Barcelona for the weekend. We have a lot of things to tell you. Went to Barcelona for the weekend. Lots to tell you. Which one is more formal? Absolutely, the top example is more formal because it is written in standard English and it is grammatically correct. In the second one, you can understand what is going on. You can infer the meaning, or the meaning is clear rather. However, there is no subject. Therefore, it's not grammatically correct. It's more informal, something you would write in a text or say to your friend in passing. Now, we can also use modal verbs in formal writing. Here are 3 examples of rhetorical questions using modal verbs. And I wanted to draw this your attention to modal verbs in rhetorical questions because often if we don't use the more polite form, might, then they can come across as a little rude. So, can I suggest you try this new model? That's probably right in the middle. It's not that informal, but it's not formal. So we wouldn't really use can. May I suggest you try this model? More formal, but the most formal is might. Might I suggest you employ a new chef? Or might I suggest you get someone to check your products before sending them out? In hindsight, employing a new chef isn't probably proportionate, unless, of course, you've had to complain lots of times about the food. So always try and remember to use might if you're using a rhetorical question in your complaint letter. Now, here is task 1. Do you know the difference? What I would like you to do now is pause the video and create a table. On one side, write formal, and on the other side, write informal. In each of these rows, there is a formal and an informal example saying the same thing. So I'm going to do the first one for you. I think, or it is my opinion that. One of these is formal and the other is informal. Which one is formal? Good. It is my opinion that is formal, and I think is informal. That's something you're more likely to say in speech. So please pause the video now and split your page in 2. In one column, pop the words in that are formal or the phrases, and in the other, put in the words that are informal. As you can see, I've mixed them all up. Welcome back. You should have now created a table outlining your formal and informal examples. I'm going to go through them, and if you could mark your work to show me your understanding on Seesaw, that would be great. Please accept our apologies for is formal, sorry is informal. Just a note to say, informal, I'm writing to inform you, formal. Cheers, informal. I am most grateful, formal. This action of yours is unacceptable, very formal. What you're doing is stupid, informal. Yours sincerely, formal. Talk later, informal. In addition to my earlier point, that is formal. And a really big one to remember in complaint letters also is very informal, and we wouldn't use it as a linking adverbial. And finally, you're stupid if you don't listen to me is informal. And to ignore this advice would be perilous. Perilous means dangerous. That is formal. So well done if you managed to get all of those questions correct. Have a think. In class, a teacher asks you a question, but you don't know the answer. What's the most appropriate response? A, B, or C? Read the screen and tell me your response. Well done if you notice that C is the most appropriate response. We should always talk in a more formal way to teachers or adults, especially in a school setting. I'm not sure, could you explain please? However, I don't know is okay as well. It is slightly less formal, but if it's said in a polite way, then that wouldn't come across as rude at all. Okay, I'm not sure, could you explain please, is probably the most appropriate one, depending on how well you know the teacher. If you were using I don't know rather than just saying I don't know, you would probably say, I'm sorry, I don't know. B, how am I supposed to know, would come across as rude. But if you know the teacher very well, or if you're used to, if I don't know is maybe common language in your classroom, then that's not a problem either. Let's have a look at the next example. You're at an interview for a job you really want. You're asked why you want the job. What do you say? Don't know. I'd love to work for you. I think it would be enjoyable and rewarding. I reckon it'll be okay. If I go for it, I'd be good at the job. Well, you wouldn't say don't know, because it's not like the classroom example where you know the teacher and you're more familiar with them. This here would come across as rude, and if you can't explain to them why you'd like the job, then you certainly wouldn't get it. So that is far too informal and inappropriate. Now, B and C are both quite polite. B is the correct answer. I'd love to work with you. I think it would be enjoyable and rewarding. Why is B the most appropriate response? I want you to think really carefully about precise language. Well done if you spotted that B was the most enthusiastic and politest response, but it also used language such as enjoyable and rewarding to convey to the reader just how much this interviewee really wants the job. Even though this one isn't rude, the language doesn't convince me that they actually really want this job. So therefore, in any formal situation, whether it's a complaint letter or an interview, we must be really precise with our language. If we were writing a complaint letter about food, which we'll look at one in a moment, if we say, oh, the food wasn't that good, then the use of the word good isn't going to really make the reader think it was a huge problem. If you say the food was the worst I've ever experienced at your restaurant, then that precise language is going to convey to the reader just how much of a problem it was. So we have to really be careful about our language. Now, let's have a look at this complaint letter to a restaurant, and this will form the basis of today's task. To whom it may concern. This is a real letter that we have. It was written to a restaurant in London. I am writing to tell you how disgusting the food was and how rude your waiters were in the Victoria branch of your restaurant on the evening of Tuesday, the 27th of October. I always come here and usually the food is sick. Often, I even encourage friends and family members to dine with you. Unfortunately, the experience of yesterday evening has made me somewhat reconsider my position. Have a think. Why have I underlined, or why have I highlighted two phrases, one in green and one in yellow? Well done if you spotted that these two phrases are entirely inappropriate for a formal complaint letter. We're now ready to begin today's second independent task. Please pause the video now and write the date, Monday the 1st of March, and the what. We are learning to use formal language when writing a complaint letter. Now, before you begin this part of the lesson, I would advise you to read through the complaint letter to the restaurant that I have attached on the home learning document so that you can get an idea of what we're complaining about. Remember, all the sections that are highlighted in green, yellow or blue are informal, and we will be rewriting them today. I'm going to model 3 of them with you. I'm going to model the green one, the yellow one and one of the blue ones. And for each of the other ones, you need to write a formal alternative. So, how are you going to lay out your work today? First of all, you're going to write the heading informal, and next to it, you're going to write the first highlighted example. So you can see I have written the green highlighted example, which says, I am writing to tell you how disgusting the food was and how rude your waiters were. You don't need to write out the whole paragraph, you just need to write out the phrase that's been highlighted. As we discussed, that's not formal writing, nor is it polite, so it wouldn't be appropriate. Some of the language choices in there, including disgusting and rude, are not ones that we would expect to see in this style of writing, especially when we're hoping to receive a favourable outcome from the restaurant. This will offend them immediately, and often these people are trying their very best to provide you with a good service, so it's important to be kind as well. When we've written out the informal example that's highlighted, for each one underneath you need to write the heading formal, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to come up with a formal alternative that could go into the letter in place of this. So I've underlined the word tell because tell is slightly informal. Instead of tell, I'm going to say I am writing to express. And instead of saying your disgusting food, or instead of saying I'm going to tell you about your disgusting food, I've said I am writing to express my disappointment at the standard of service received in the Victoria branch of your restaurant. So much more formal and much more polite, but the word disappointment is quite an emotive word, and the owners of this restaurant, I suspect, will certainly not want to disappoint anybody. So I've really carefully chosen that. So your job will be to write a formal example that still conveys the same meaning, but doesn't include any rude or impolite words or phrases. Now, let's have a look at the second phrase that was highlighted. This one was highlighted in yellow. Oh, this one was highlighted in green, sorry, and the first one was highlighted in yellow. And this one said, I always come here and usually the food is sick. In fact, just ignore my colours. I'm getting confused about the colours of highlighting. Any phrase that is highlighted, no matter what colour, I'm not quite sure why I changed colour in midway between, they're all informal, so they all need to be converted to formal language. So let's read this one out. I always come here and usually the food is sick. Well, the phrase the food is sick is incredibly informal because sick is a slang word. Let's have a think. What's a more formal way of saying, I always come here? Absolutely, you could say, I have been coming here for many years. You might say something like, I have always enjoyed the times that I've spent at your restaurant, or I've been fortunate enough to visit your restaurant numerous times in the past. Lots of different ways of phrasing that. So I'm going to say, I have been fortunate. Lucky is probably a little bit too informal. I have been fortunate to have been able to visit Instead of come here, I'm actually going to say your restaurant, or in fact, I might say your establishment, which is even more formal. I have been fortunate to have been able to visit your establishment several times before. If we said something like lots, that would be too informal. Several times before. And now I want to keep the same meaning, so I still want to convey that I was really impressed or that I have been really impressed by the food in the past, but I'm certainly not going to say, but usually the food is sick. Have a think. How could I express how impressed I've been with the food in the past? Absolutely, you could say something like, and I've always been impressed by the standard of food I've received. And I've always enjoyed every meal I've been able to have at your restaurant. And I've always been blown away by the food that I've received. Or you might even say something like, and I've encouraged family and friends to dine with you because of the food that I have received. And really making the restaurant owner feel good before you deliver the bad news to them. that you weren't satisfied. Then they're more likely to give you the outcome you want because they know that actually you are being serious and you're not just complaining for no reason. So, let's say, I've been fortunate to have been able to visit your establishment several times before, and I often encourage family and friends to dine with you. That means to eat with you. And that's a really formal way, polite way of saying the same message as, I always come here and usually your food is sick. The restaurant owner might not even understand that. Now, let's look at our final example then. It was obvious that there wasn't enough staff and they were all just so slow. It was obvious comes across as a little bit rude. So, I want to get the point across that there wasn't enough staff. Instead of saying it was obvious, I'm going to say it was clear. It was clear from the outset that, now I don't want to comment on them being all so slow because that is another word, or that could come across as quite rude. So, but I would like to say that they didn't maybe provide the service that I expect. I think that would be a more polite way of phrasing that. So I'm going to say it was clear from the outside that the restaurant did not have enough staff. Did not have enough staff is still a little bit formal or informal. How could you rephrase that? The restaurant absolutely did not have sufficient staff or did not have the required number of staff. That the restaurant did not have the required number of staff and what did they not have the required number of staff to do? Yes, to provide a fast service or to provide a good service. The reason why they were so slow is because they probably had so much to do. So I could say they did not have enough or a sufficient staff to provide a good service or to provide your usual service. So I'm going to be polite and I'm going to acknowledge that in the past it has been really good. So I'm going to say they did not have the required number of staff to provide your usual high standards of service. Now, as I alluded to, it's really important to really try and get into the emotions of the reader. The fact that you're telling them, you know that their restaurant can be great. You know that their restaurant provides delicious food. You know that they usually have a really high standard. That will compel them to do something about it because they know you're a valued customer and they won't want to let you down. So you need to really tap into their emotions. Okay, so you have got 10 examples. I've done 3 with you there. And for each of them, I would like you to write out the informal phrase with the heading informal above it. And the informal phrase is the one that's either highlighted in blue, green or yellow. And underneath, write your formal alternative. So you can lay your work out like this, or you could do a table and you could write informal here and formal here. It's the first day of our new genre, so please give it your best shot. Formal writing is hard, especially when you're doing it in the context of complaint letters, because you're probably a little bit young to have had to write one before. But it could be good practice, or will be good practice, because you never know when you might require one. I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson, and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of your outstanding work on Seesaw as usual. Have a great day, Year 6. Bye.